Clara Weiss pressed her forehead to the slatted window of the tour bus while the first spires of Vienna slid into view. Rain glossed the grey rooftops, and every so often a gold dome glimmered like a sudden high note. She tapped the rhythm of a Scarlatti sonato on the sill, already hearing in her mind the bright jangle of her harpsichord's quills against brass. Tonight her ensemble, Les Èves de Parnasse, would play for the Imperial Charity Gala at the Hofburg Palace, the kind of engagement that could turn a niche Baroque group into a household name. Inside the bus, the others rehearsed in soft hums. Luca folded and unfolded passages on his wooden traverse flute. Josephine sang continuo lines under her breath. Conrad, the cellist, traced bowing patterns on his thigh. Their tour manager, Max Berger, sat up front, shuffling contracts like a street conjurer. Everything felt taut, expectant, shiny as new violin varnish. When they pulled up at the Künstlerhaus Hotel, a porter in livery whisked away their cases, except for Clara's harpsichord, which occupied the rear of the bus like an upholstered sarcophagus. The instrument was a 1723 Ruckers Vermel, its soundboard painted with Dutch tulips and a small mischievous squirrel. Clara had named it Brunhilde. Airline holds and freight elevators terrified her on Brunhilde's behalf, so she insisted on supervised unloading. "Just remember," Luca teased while they waited for the freight lift, "no Viennese cafe until after we rehearse. Marzipan fingers smudge the keys." Clara rolled her eyes. "You're one to talk. You still have pastry sugar in your flute case from Prague." They laughed, tension dissolving into the easy banter of colleagues who had lived for months inside the same buses, hotels, and backstage corridors. None of them noticed the slender man in a charcoal coat loitering near the service entrance, smoking a cigarette without ever drawing on it. That afternoon they rehearsed in the Musikverein's Brahms Saal Nutriol ground provided by the festival before tomorrow night's palace performance. Brunhilde sounded regal, every harmonic blooming into the domed ceiling. Clara's fingertips traced familiar patterns, and the ensemble locked in with that thrilling click one feels when centuries-old music becomes a living creature. After rehearsal, palace officials delivered embossed invitations and instructions. Arrive by 3, sound check at 4, banquet at 6, concert promptly at 8. Dress uniforms for men, jewel-toned gowns for women, medals, no avant-garde shoes. The Archduchess Maria Theresia herself would receive them. Back at the hotel, Clara wiped down Brunhilde's soundboard with a lint-free cloth. She inspected the registers, the plectra, and the metal strings, all replaced just last month. Everything shipshape. She slid the soundboard cover back into place, locked the flight case, and joined the others for a celebratory schnitzel downstairs. Night settled quietly. A bellhop lugged their instruments to the basement storeroom. Standard security, Max assured them. The hotel's vault-like cellar was safer than any guest room. Exhausted, Clara retired early. She dreamed of twisting corridors lined with sheet music, pages aflutter in a poisonous wind. Morning brought an edge of anxiety. The Austrian press was already buzzing about dueling Baroque ensembles. Les Élèves du Parnasse from France, and, programmed late in the gala, La Cappella Imperiale from Prague. The story cast it as a musical prize fight. Max shrugged. Free publicity. At noon, Clara descended to the basement to fetch Brunhilde for a warm-up session. The storeroom smelled of cedar and floor wax. The flight case stood exactly where she had left it, padlock intact. She rolled Brunhilde onto the freight lift, up to a mezzanine parlor the hotel had granted them, and opened the lid to check her tuning. The first thing she noticed was the absence of Brunhilde's faint lemon oil fragrance. The second was a different smell, almost metallic, undercut with the sweetness of old leather and something like bitter almonds. She leaned closer. The strings gleamed, but not in the usual silvery way. They looked organic, faintly yellowish, and wound in a slightly uneven twist. Confused, she plucked middle C. Instead of the crisp ring of iron, she heard a duller, gutty twang, as if a viola da gamba had snuck under the lid. Her heart performed a syncopated triplet. Gut strings? Impossible. Harpsichords of Brunhilde's variety used iron and brass, never gut. Clara's stomach turned cold. Somebody had restrung the entire instrument overnight. She ran a fingertip along a string and felt a tiny burr. A shallow nick opened on her skin. Almost at once, the cut burned, sharper than a paper cut. She smelled the almond note again and jerked her hand away. Arsenic, whispered a memory from conservatory toxicology lectures. Bitter almond odor, though not everyone could detect it. She flipped the music desk aside and inspected the back rail. Fine white dust collected in the corners as if someone had sprinkled flour. Luca found her minutes later, pale and silent, splayed on the carpet like a crime scene chalk drawing around Brunhilde. "Clara, what's wrong?" She showed him the cut, the strings, the dust. Luca sniffed the air and coughed. "Santissimo. Is that what I think it is?" "Arsenic trioxide," she murmured, "used in the 18th century to preserve gut against worms. But it's lethal if inhaled as dust, or if it enters the bloodstream through cuts. Whoever did this wanted me poisoned, or at least incapacitated. On stage." Luca's normally olive complexion blanched to parchment. "We need a chemist, a doctor, someone." They hustled upstairs to Max Berger's suite. The manager snapped his laptop shut when they burst in. As Clara explained, he strode around the room, rubbing his jaw. "This is sabotage," he concluded. "If you tried to play those strings under stage lights, the friction would release arsenic dust into the air. Half the ensemble could inhale it. You could even dose the Archduchess sitting in the front row." "Good God," Lucas said. Max phoned the palace, the hotel security chief, the Vienna police. Bureaucratic molasses followed. Because no one had yet been harmed, the police suggested filing a report and avoiding the storeroom. Hotel security claimed their cameras were under maintenance. "That concert starts in 8 hours, Max fumed after hanging up. "No strings, no harpsichord, no continuo, no contract, no fee." Clara ignored him. She was staring at Brunhilde through the parlour door, as if the instrument were a stranded child. "We'll restring her," she said quietly. "We'll find proper wire. There's time if we hurry." Luca blinked. "Where in Vienna do we buy antique gauge iron wire on a Saturday afternoon?" "From Anna Hirsch," Clara answered. "If anyone can help, it's her." Hirsch's Werkstatt für historische Tasteninstrumente occupied a cramped shop behind St. Stephen's Cathedral. Clara had met Anna years before at a workshop in Basel. The luthier was a formidable woman with walnut-stained hands and the focus of a master surgeon. They raced through drizzling streets in a taxi. At the shop, Anna, spectacles fogged from glue fumes, listened to the story without interrupting. When Clara finished, Anna removed her glasses, wiped them on her apron, and said simply, "Bring me the harpsichord. I have wire, and I know a doctor who can test that dust for police evidence." While Max fetched Brunhilde, Anna led Clara and Luca into a back room lined with soundboards, rose carvings, and wire spools hung like precious metals. She produced a tin labelled Martin Rest 1720 High Carbon Iron and told Luca to tack down a stringing chart on the workbench. Clara felt time hammering in her pulse. "We only have 5 hours." Anna smiled grimly. "4 is plenty if we work like devils." Brunstedt arrived in Pieceslid, cheekboards, rest plank, carried by a hotel porter persuaded by a fistful of euros. Anna donned nitrile gloves and lifted out the gut strings with tongs, placing them in a sealed bag. Clara watched, heart aching at every pluck. Thin white dust puffed into the lamplight. They held their breath. Anna vacuumed the cavity with a HEPA attachment, then swabbed the rest plank with alcohol. "Whoever did this knows historical practice," Anna said. "Gut in a harpsichord, anachronistic but plausible to a layman. Arsenic to preserve catgut, very 18th century, sinisterly clever." "Capelle petiale," Luca suggested. Professional jealousy? Anna shrugged. Could be. Or someone with deeper stakes. The Archduchess's philanthropic fund channels millions. Disrupt the gala, and certain investments tremble. They restrung in silence save for the snip of pliers and the chirp of wires sliding through hitch pins. The smell of oil and rosin replaced the almond reek. Clara's cut on her finger throbbed. Luca dabbed it with iodine. Twice the church bells of St. Stephen's called the hour, urging them onward. At last the last wire was wound. Time, 5:12 p.m. The concert was scheduled for 8. They had just under 3 hours to change, sound check, and eat something resembling food. Anna clasped Clara's shoulders. Play like hell tonight, and watch your backs. A police chemist collected the poisoned strings and dust for analysis, but Clara had no faith in slow gears of justice. The saboteur, she suspected, would try again, perhaps more crudely now that subtlety had failed. Max chartered a van, straight to the Hofburg musicians' entrance. The palace backstage was a bewildering lattice of marble corridors, gilt pilasters, and guards in burgundy uniforms. Their dressing rooms smelled of drying lilies and the starch of newly laundered napery. Clara tuned Brunhilde under stage lights that fizzed like insects. The new wires were still settling and required delicate coaxing. As she nudged A equals 415 into place, a familiar figure drifted by the open door. Maestro Pavel Resnik, director of La Capella Imperiale. Tall, fox-faced, ponytail streaked with silver. He paused, inclined his head. "Ah, Mademoiselle Weiss," he purred. "I hope your instrument made the trip unharmed." Clara's gaze narrowed. "Quite unharmed, thank you. How fortunate." His smile barely creased his lips before he sauntered off. Luca appeared beside her, eyes flaring. "He was at the Musikverein yesterday, prowling around after we finished rehearsal." "We can't accuse without proof," Clara murmured, but acid churned in her gut. She pushed suspicion aside and concentrated on the tuning pins. F sharp, C sharp, final octave, done. Banquet hour arrived. They filed into the grand hall, dazzling with chandeliers and uniforms and the Archduchess's diamond coronet. Clara managed bites of smoked trout and Riesling. Every mouthful tasted like chalk. Resnik and his musicians sat 2 tables away, laughing among themselves, raising toasts to Moravia and fidelity to the score. Resnik caught Clara's eye and winked. 7:30, stage call. Back in the green room, Conrad rosined his bow, Josephine reviewed ornamentation options, and Clara flexed hands still tingling from adrenaline. Max entered, face drained. "Bad news," he said. "The palace locksmith found our van doors jimmied. Someone sliced 3 of Conrad's cello strings and loosened the tail gut. Gardner, the oboist's reeds are missing, and Brunhilde's case was unlatched." Clara lunged to the harpsichord. The lid was shut. She lifted it gingerly. The strings held, no white dust, but she discovered a fragment of paper between the keys, a torn scrap of a concert flyer for La Capella Imperiale, edges wet with what looked like linseed oil, excellent for sabotaging quills so they'd swell and snap during performance. "Enough," Clara hissed. "Resnik wants a duel? Very well." Max started, alarmed. "What are you planning?" "Something baroque," she answered, and marched toward the stage entrance. 8 o'clock, a flourish of trumpets announced the Archduchess. The hall fell silent. Clara seated herself at Brunhilde, heart hammering. Luca, Conrad, Josephine, and the rest arranged themselves in semicircle. The maestro of the court, Herr Dietrich, stepped forward. "Mesdames et messieurs, en reste, les leveurs du Parnasse present an ode to charity in the style of Lully and Ram." Clara drew breath. She dropped her hands to the keys and let loose. The opening chaconne rolled like a living river, harpsichord crisp, strings warm, flute floating above. The palace's vaulted ceiling returned every overtone in shimmering wreaths. Clara darted glances at Luca and at the audience. She felt them leaning in, captivated, No quill broke, no string slipped. The sabotage had failed. In the third movement, Clara improvised a cadenza, referencing a sly bohemian folk tune, Resnick's own signature encore piece. Heads in the audience turned toward the Prague contingent, who shifted uncomfortably. Resnick sat, stiff as an obelisk. Thunderous applause met the final cadence. They bowed, cheeks flushed. As they stepped off stage, palace guards materialized. One presented Resnick with a folded document. Another relieved him of his backstage pass. Max had quietly handed over the chemist's analysis and the scrap soaked in linseed oil, now bearing Resnick's fingerprints collected from a wineglass. The evidence was circumstantial but damning enough for detainment, pending inquiry. Clara watched Resnick escorted away. He passed her, eyes blazing. "This is not over." "I think," Clara replied softly, "it's a perfect authentic cadence." The musicians exhaled as if emerging from underwater. Josephine hugged Clara. Conrad wiped eyes he claimed were watery from rosin dust. For the encore, they struck up a sprightly rondeau, Hearts Light. Backstage, the Archduchess thanked them personally, praising their resilience. She bestowed gilt medallions and invited them to Alexandria in spring. Champagne corks flew. Yet when the entourage drifted out, Clara remained with Brunhilde, stroking the tulips on the soundboard. "You saved us," she whispered, though she might have been speaking to Anna Hirsch, or to the centuries of craftsmen whose hands had shaped wood and wire into music. Luca approached, 2 flutes tucked under his arm like umbrellas. "We should celebrate," he said. "In a minute." Clara played a quiet scale, listening to each note bloom and vanish. After the final high D evaporated into palace silence, she closed the lid gently, latched it herself, and straightened. "Now," she said, linking her arm through Luca's, "about that Viennese cafe. I believe I owe you a slice of sacerdote." They walked into the marble corridor, instruments beside them like loyal animals, moonlight catching the harpsichord's brass hinges. Sabotage, jealousy, even poison, none of it had silenced the music. And as any Baroque bass line will attest, so long as the ground holds firm, the variations above it can dance forever.